is Dr. Sahar Khamis. Welcome to my program, The Bridge, a monthly show bridging different cultures, communities, and faith traditions. Watch The Bridge on America's Voice of the Arabs Network on all social media platforms. Good morning, everyone. This is your host, Dr. Sahar Khamis. Welcome to another great program, The Bridge, on Radio Baladi on US Arab Radio and also live streaming on Facebook. We are talking today about a very timely, very important topic. Between the 9/11's 20th anniversary and the Afghanistan crisis, are we actually witnessing a new wave of surging Islamophobia? And with me this morning discussing this important topic are two experts. They are American Muslims who have a lot to say about this important topic. So I'm sure we're going to have a very lively and interesting discussion. My first guest, Mr. Shahed Amanullah, is Managing Director of Frost Capital. From 2011 to 2014, he served in President Obama's administration as Senior Advisor for Technology at the US Department of State. He is the founder of Alt Muslim, an online magazine with 2.5 million online users. He is also the advisor to the Muslim Caucus of America, which empowers Muslim candidates seeking public office and educates American Muslims about the civic responsibilities that they should always undertake. He is also a founding board member of the Muslim Public Service Network, which graduated hundreds of Muslims interested in public service since 1993. My second guest is Dr. Amin Asfari. He is an associate professor in the Department of Criminal Justice at Wake Tech College and also a contributing faculty member at Campbell University in the Departments of History, Political Science, and Criminal Justice. He has a lot of interdisciplinary research in different areas and especially studies the different aspects of othering and victimization affecting Muslims in general and American Muslims in particular. His research cross-cuts the areas of public policy, criminal justice reform, prejudice, and race, with a special emphasis on Islamophobia. So they're just the right guests to have for this discussion this morning. Thank you so much, Shahed and Amin, for joining us this morning for this discussion.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Amin, let's start with the definition, the term Islamophobia. A lot of people would say, the term phobia always means like, I'm scared of something or I'm overly scared of something. And indeed, that's what the word phobia really means or refers to. But how did the term Islamophobia itself actually come into being? How was it actually coined and defined as such?
The term actually comes out in 1997 in the UK in a report called the Runnymede Trust Report. That's when it was first coined, really looking at the Muslim communities and how they were taken out of the economic mainstream, so the economic policies that left them marginalized and otherized. But it was a distaste or a dislike of Muslims. There's in the academic community regarding this term, there's always a sort of a battle about this term and this definition. Is it, clinical psychologists say, well, a phobia is a clinical term and it should not be used here because you're not afraid of Muslims. You may have certain prejudices towards them, but you're not necessarily afraid of them. In fact, the argument is, some people say you are afraid of them precisely because you don't interact with them, much like arachnophobia. You don't necessarily interact with spiders on a daily basis, and that's precisely why you fear spiders. And given that Muslims make up less than 1% of the American Muslim population, that's precisely the argument, that it's the lack of interaction, whether that's personal interaction or vicarious interaction through the media, through mainstream media, positive mainstream images of Muslims. And so oftentimes the argument is, well, the phobia comes from the negative depiction of Muslims. The media always portrays Muslims historically as, even prior to 9/11, as somehow warlike or savages, hypersexual, deviant, etc. And that's certainly heightened post 9/11. So the term is rather convoluted and has an interesting history.
Absolutely, I totally agree. And we're definitely going to touch upon the media aspect of all of this in our discussion today, that's for sure. Shahed, let me turn to you with a question about also the reasons, the root causes, for the rise or the surge of Islamophobia in general, not specifically in relation or in the context of 9/11, which we're going to talk about more elaborately later in the discussion. But in general, what are some of the root causes of the surge of Islamophobia?
So Islamophobia is actually a very complex phenomenon. And it's interesting, people talk about the surge of Islamophobia. And of course, Amin and I were speaking a little bit before the broadcast. Islamophobia has always been here. It's been here as long as people have been aware of Muslims in the world. Even when Muslims were not a visible part of American society, there was still Islamophobia. And the quality of it changes over time. As a matter of fact, what I see happening today is you see this almost centrifuge effect. When Trump came into office, a lot of people who were on the fence about Islamophobia, became our defenders. But then you had, on the other side, people actually getting more virulent about their Islamophobia. It started from a place of ignorance, but it has so many different factors. There's a race factor. There's an anti-immigrant factor. There's an anti-religion factor. There's simply an ignorance factor. There's so many different things, and that's why Islamophobia is fairly unique phenomenon. The good news is that as people are educated, we permanently off-ramp people from Islamophobia. But the bad news is that even as people get educated, they become smarter Islamophobes. They actually become much more intelligent and devious about the ways that they want to exclude us from society.
Absolutely, I totally agree. But let's talk specifically about 9/11. 9/11 in particular as a moment had a huge impact, and it still does, in terms of the way Muslims are framed, Muslims in general. And of course, people are coming from the Arab world, because of the nationalities of those who carried out the attacks. So it really became, if I can use the term, Islamophobia and Arabophobia, right? So also fear of Arabs and people who come from the Middle East. Shahed, can you talk to us a little bit about the significance of 9/11 as a moment, a historical moment, and really the kind of impact and effects it had in terms of, this rising Islamophobia and Arabophobia?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. 9/11 was the milestone where before that Islamophobia was a fear of the other far away from us. Mm-hmm. And I think what 9/11 did is it, for a lot of people who are kind of stricken with Islamophobia, it became the neighbor, the person next door. It was this realization that, oh my goodness, there are millions of Muslims in this country. There are people, all of a sudden there was a heightened awareness of Arabic or heightened awareness of hijabs, or, and people all of a sudden, if they were maybe ignoring us before, all of a sudden we're extremely aware. Now, I want to stress something. 9/11 also had a very profound impact on Muslim communities themselves. There were, I think American Muslims, Arabs, anyone who looked the part, reclaimed and re-embraced their identity in the wake of 9/11. Let's not forget that on the day of 9/11, there are 1,250 mosques in this country. We have well over 3,000 now. And that's not because we doubled or tripled the number of Muslims in this country. It's because we reclaimed our identity in the face of Islamophobia.
Right, absolutely. I totally agree. I mean, this year is different because this year, 2021, we're actually celebrating the 20th anniversary of 9/11. So I've been witnessing much more, coverage, much more attention. The media has been giving a lot more, importance to this particular, 20th anniversary of 9/11. How do you see a connection between this and a wave of Islamophobia, if any?
Well, let me just piggyback off of what Shahed said. I want to say that 9/11 exposed, Sigmund Freud talked about the childhood terrors. And it was this uncanny fear that something is awry in 9/11. And all of a sudden it brought us back to our childlike state. We need a strong man to defend us. Hence, we see the rise of Donald Trump. We are the children lacking a parental figure, and there's a boogeyman amongst us, and we need George W. We need We need someone to do something. Something is not right, right? And we can't really put our finger on it. And the public policy messaging that was coming out was, beware. It could be anywhere. It could be your neighbor next door. It could be, there's no such thing as a good Muslim, and so on and so forth. It was really an era of panic. And we're reminded of this on every 9/11 anniversary. And this year is, of course, particularly striking given what's happening in Afghanistan and whatnot. But I would say, in terms of reclaiming our identity, I'm going to push back on that a little bit, because I suspect that Islamophobia also created an identity crisis in the Muslim community. I would argue that if you look at the literature on assimilation, we find that hyper-religiosity was a byproduct of Islamophobia. It's trying to identify, who am I, especially as a second-generation person, and they identify this thing called living on the hyphen. Am I American, or am I Muslim, or am I somewhere in between? And some people make the jump to the Muslim, and they become hyper-religious and thus exclude themselves further from the American mainstream. And that's why you see the rise of mosques and so on, and they become more insular. But to some degree, some of those institutions also become more civically engaged. So it's an interesting paradox.
Absolutely. And we'll come back to this discussion about the role of organizations specifically, and how different organizations, whether they are Muslim organizations or even in some cases non-Muslim allies of the Muslim community, do play a role in terms of pushing back and fighting against Islamophobia and other forms of racism, I should say. Shahed, this year is also different, not just because it's the 20th anniversary of 9/11, but also because in combination, right, and that's the theme of today's discussion and today's program really, we're also witnessing a major crisis, which is the Afghanistan crisis. And it has been making headlines, been making the news, people have been talking about it, of course, because of its huge humanitarian, political, strategic implications. How do you see this connection between the 20th anniversary of 9/11 and the Afghanistan crisis together playing a role in terms of a surge in Islamophobia?
Oh, so this is a very good question. And I think we have to remember that for the people who perpetrate Islamophobia, there's a vested interest in doing so. There's a power in it. It mobilizes a voter base. It generates fear for certain policies. And the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan were both driven in part by playing to Islamophobic tropes and using that as a wedge to get people to support it. And I think what we're seeing now, 20 years later, when all of us who were saying that our violence and occupation were not going to solve problems, they were simply going to foment problems, have essentially been proven right. I fear that it's gonna actually trigger, let's say we're damned if we do and we're damned if we don't. Mm-hmm. They used Islamophobia to start the war. The war doesn't go their way, and that's going to bring more Islamophobia because they're frustrated at the outcome. We have to be on guard to face it from wherever we see it. And by the way, I want to make it clear. I mean, the right is the primary home of Islamophobia in this country. Don't get me wrong. But you even see it on the left. You even see it among our allies, who pathologize us, who still use Islam as a benchmark for bad things. When they talk about the things that are happening in Texas, they're like the Texas Taliban. They're still using Islam as a benchmark for bad and violent and extreme, even when defining their own people. And so this is what I mean. It's like a chimera. It's always changing. It's always morphing, and we have to stay on guard because of that.
I totally agree. It's not fixed. It's not static. It is always dynamic, always in flux, always changing. And that's why we have to always up our game as people who want to counter Islamophobia, to come up with new, countering techniques and strategies. Amin, let me come to you with the same question, since this is really the heart and the core of our discussion today. How do you see this kind of combination or mix between the 20th anniversary of 9/11 and also the Afghanistan crisis together playing a role in terms of a surging wave of Islamophobia?
It's a unique time for sure. Consider what consider what Shahed just said about this comparison of them and the Taliban, right? The sort of the Texas Taliban. If you can, the pathologizing, I think, was the term that you used. So the left, has this unique way of also engaging in Islamophobia. The opposite of Islamophobia is Islamophilia. This notion of that the Muslim is also somehow very good, and in so doing, the hyper focus on the Muslim is also problematic. That they're all in both cases, it's homogenizing the Muslim. And we see that rhetoric coming out of the left, even in regards to the Taliban situation in Afghanistan. Well, that these are all the good people. And what exactly makes them good? It makes them good because they helped serve the American empire's role. See, when Hillary Clinton brought out the family who was the family of the fallen soldier, we were expected to applaud as Muslims because he was a Muslim who served the American empire, and that makes him a sort of a patriotic American. This is coming from the left, who supposedly does not want wars, oppose the Iraq war and the Iraq invasion. Nonetheless, that sort of delineates what makes a good Muslim versus a bad Muslim. What Michel Foucault called sort of drawing those lines between good and bad. So I think it's a troubling paradox that we find ourselves in, and we have to resist the homogenizing of the Muslim in general.
Absolutely. Looking at your research and your profile, I mean, also there are two interesting terms that really caught my attention when it comes to the discussion of American Muslims and Muslims' identities in general, and how they're being profiled, the terms othering and the term, victimization. So these particular terms, when you talk about Muslims being quote unquote the other with a capital O, and this process of othering, and also this term victimization, can you shed some light on these two particular terms and how they are really playing a role in terms of building Islamophobia?
Well, sure. The unique thing about the Muslim identity is anytime you conduct research on the Muslim identity, what are we talking about? Are we talking about a racial category? So sometimes we find ourselves complicit in the othering because we're studying Muslims and we're racializing that group. So we have to say, what do Muslims believe about X? Well, what does it mean to be Muslim? Is the Chinese Muslim the same as the Texan Muslim? And do we account for their racial differences? Do we account for their unique sort of cultural differences? So we are sometimes complicit in that racialization as well, even though we may be well-intentioned. But that's how we have been sort of, the spotlight has been put on us, and we're now having to defend or study this group called Muslims, on the Muslim identity. So that's the interesting thing. It's also part of this, what Kimberly Crenshaw called intersectionality. They live at this intersection of race, of religion, etc. I'm working on a book with a colleague, he's a Jewish colleague, and we're talking about this very same issue of racialization of the Jewish community, which was done to them in the 19th century, where, of course, it suited Hitler's purposes to racialize Jewishness. You can never escape your Jewishness by, say, conversion, and thus we can burn you in an oven. And that's the same thing. There's something inherent about you, and what Bat-Yor, who wrote a book called Eurabia, which is used by white supremacists, essentially arguing that the Arabs are taking over usurping the West. The argument there is, she called it the jihad trait, that's something indelible to the Muslim identity. And if we can racialize the group, and essentially you can be born a Muslim, regardless of how much practice you have, right? If you're a liberal Muslim, if you're a conservative Muslim, it is part of your identity and you can never escape it. You are something to be feared. So that's the issue of othering and victimization. You're victimized by your phenotype. interestingly, you notice that the mass shooters or the person that ran over the family in Canada, would he have run over a family that would have been blonde-haired, blue-eyed Canadians that were Muslims? I suspect not. So they're going off of those messages from mass media, from memes, etc. They're not attuned to studies of phenotypes and so on. They simply know what they're looking for. As Shahed mentioned, it's the messaging that people that are deemed to look like Muslims. Hence, what you saw in Sikh communities, the shootings of those individuals. So that's the problem that we face.
Absolutely, and let me just quickly comment on two things here before we go to a commercial break. Number one, this idea of you cannot escape your Jewishness, I would say you cannot also escape your Muslimness, right? Especially if you are, for example, a woman wearing the hijab like myself. You are a hijabi woman, you walk out in the street and literally you are wearing your identity on your sleeves. Anybody who's going to see you out there is going to understand and know that you are a Muslim. And I know a lot of Muslim women who are quite uncomfortable, to put it, in the most mild way, under the Trump era in particular, because of the horrible rhetoric like Islam hates us and so on, that really endangered a lot of Muslims, but especially those who have a Muslim identity. And definitely the second point about the phenotype, you look at after 9/11 and you look at some groups coming under attack, even though they were not Muslims, but Sikh, for example, who would just be killed because they look like Muslims or they were assumed to be Muslims. Like the man who was killed, people thought that he was looking like bin Laden. So this is definitely a tragedy. We'll come back to this interesting discussion right after this commercial break. Stay tuned, please.
While we've been staying safe at home, scientists have been on a journey. The destination, a COVID-19 vaccine. This journey began decades ago with research into other coronaviruses. Scientists built from there with months of research and development, cooperation with other experts worldwide, and clinical trials on tens of thousands of volunteers of diverse race, age, and health status. They arrived at a safe, effective vaccine, and hundreds of thousands in Michigan have already been vaccinated. But the next step is ours. We need to get the vaccine when we can. Keep wearing masks correctly and taking precautions until we reach our destination, freedom from COVID-19 and getting back to the lives we love. Discover the facts for yourself at michigan.gov/COVID vaccine. A message from the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services.
Enjoy the first Syrian-style cuisine in Michigan. At Damas Cuisine and Catering, you'll find a wide selection of Syrian foods and sweets in our menu, like frikeh, poisi, grape leaves with steak, mashawi platter, hot mahashi, char-grilled kebab, shawarma, and much more. Get super fast delivery from Damas Cuisine and Catering right to your door. Order online at damascuisine.com/menu and track your order live. Damas Cuisine and Catering, 28841 Orchard Lake Road in Farmington Hills. Call 248-987-4985.
When you're looking for the best in optical care, Dr. Imad Nakash is your doctor to see. With years of experience and thousands of successful procedures performed, you can trust your eyes to Dr. Imad Nakash. See Dr. Imad Nakash and his professional staff for your eye care needs. There's 2 locations to serve you. In Hazel Park, call 248-336-3937. 248-336-3937. In Rochester Hills, call 248-299-3937. That's 248-299-3937.
Ziyad brand. Quality products from our family to yours. Ziyad Brothers Importing offers the finest quality products, including brands like Sultan, Kraft, Nestle, Hook, Rico Picon, Donna, and many more. Ask your retailer to carry these fine products because you deserve the very best. For more information, visit our website at www.ziyad.com. That's www.ziyad.com. Ziyad, quality products from our family to yours.
Are your hands feeling numb? Do you feel pain opening up a jar, turning a key? Are you noticing that your elbow and your shoulder are becoming stiff? Or were you recently injured in your arm? Hello, I'm Dr. Al-Majid Katranji, and at the Katranji Hand Center, which just recently opened down the street from the Somerset Mall, we can provide you with the latest in hand, wrist, elbow, and shoulder care. Visit us at www.katranjihandcenter.com to learn the latest techniques that we have to offer you, and I look forward to taking care of you.
Visit us in Troy at 1565 West Big Beaver Road, Building F, or call Katranji Hand Center for an appointment at 248-869-4263. That's 248-869-4263.
This is Dr. Sahar Khamis. Welcome to my program, The Bridge, a monthly show bridging different cultures, communities, and faith traditions. Watch The Bridge on America's Voice of the Arabs Network on all social media platforms. Welcome back to the show, everyone. This is your host, Dr. Sahar Khamis, and we are discussing today on The Bridge a very important and timely topic. Between 9/11's 20th anniversary and the Afghanistan crisis, a new wave of Islamophobia on the rise. And with me this morning discussing this topic are two American Muslims with a lot of expertise in this particular area of Islamophobia, and also experts on the American Muslim community, Mr. Shahed Amanullah and Dr. Amin Asfari. Shahed, I cannot help but ask the question about the role of the media in all of this. As a professor and a scholar of communication, and I know that you're someone who has been involved in different, media initiatives like, the Alt Muslim magazine and other initiatives. What role can we actually attach to the media? I would like to think of it as a double-edged sword effect, right? What could be some of the ways through which, let's talk about the mainstream media in general, and also social media in particular, would have played a role in terms of boosting or somehow enabling this process of Islamophobia, but also what role could it possibly play in terms of pushing back against it?
So the most important thing to understand is that Islamophobia thrives when Muslims are not participants in the system, but are objects of the system. And so when people are using caricatures of Muslims to make points, I still remember in the days after 9/11, this is before, right when I created Alt Muslim, what frustrated me the most is that you'd have panel discussions of people talking about Muslims, not even about politics, but about Muslims themselves. And there wouldn't be a single Muslim at the table. And I would think, like, this is the way you talk about animals in a zoo, objects that have no voice. And so I think it's really important to, the goal is not to convince people that Muslims are good. The goal is to convince people that Muslims are human. And that takes a kind of an active role in projecting our voices into the media. And, thankfully in the last 20 years, we went from Muslims being very rarely in the mainstream media to, I was just joking with friends the other day, on MSNBC, you can have Ali Belchi leading into Mehdi Hassan, leading into Ayman Mohyeddin, now we've got all these Muslims in the mainstream media, not to mention Muslim creators on everything from TikTok to Twitter, who are actively kind of shaping the conversation about Muslims, to the point now where people who talk about Muslims without having us at the table look dumb for doing so. So that's one of the really good things that's happened. And I think that's put a dent in this objectification of Muslims, but it still hasn't stopped it. And so that's why, the thing about what happened in Texas was really frustrating. I was like, we've learned nothing in 20 years, where even our so-called allies are saying, let's not be extremists like those Muslims. I'm like, I thought you were my friend.
Right. And I want to take your take on this particular point also in particular, because it's very central, very important, right? Whenever somebody who is with a Muslim identity, or even has a Muslim name, or looks like a Muslim, or has an Arab name for that matter, commits some kind of violent act or an act of terrorism, we see, hundreds of times more likelihood of this particular act being, featured in the media, being talked about and discussed in the media, than let's say if the person's name was Joe Smith, right? So can you talk a little bit more here about this particular area of, the role of the media? And you also see some kind of pushback or some kind of positive utilization of media and social media to counter this phenomenon.
Yeah, I think the pushback comes from the social media. I actually like to refer to it as the anti-social media. And the pushback, let me give you an example. The Las Vegas shooter, he was a Caucasian male. His brain was taken to Stanford to analyze. There has to be something wrong with him. It can't be something endemic to his culture. It can't be that he's a terrorist or something. No, there has to be something, some pathology, to use Shahed's word. But when it's a Muslim or someone who claims to be Muslim, well, it has to be something related to their ideology. It's ideologically driven. It's almost an automatic assumption. But there is, in fact, pushback. The pushback is coming from individuals, and this is why on the previous discussion, the show that you and I were on, Dr. Khamis, I said that the brunt of Islamophobia has been borne on the shoulders of individuals, not institutions. Unfortunately, as Shahed said, yes, there has been an increase in Muslim institutions vis-a-vis mosques, but those institutions have not yet realized their role in this society, largely, with few exceptions. So they tend to stay insular. They tend to envision themselves as, places of worship and so on, carrying out the communal affairs of the community, but not necessarily to engage civilly. And that civic engagement, like Shahed said, has been borne by the youth who have been engaging on social media, taking those platforms and realizing there's a real power there, and they have agency on those platforms, and they have followers, and they've become influencers and so on. So there is pushback, but that pushback isn't systemic. And so that's why I feel we're still seeing a great deal of Islamophobia in that regard.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing up the point about civic engagement, right? Because this is very important. And when you talk about pushing back against all of that, Shahed, I actually see that you have been very active in the Muslim American community, involved in so many organizations, many initiatives, like being the advisor of the Muslim Caucus of America, also being a board member of Muslim Public Service Network. And all of these have been playing an important role in terms of encouraging American Muslims to become more civically and politically and socially engaged. Can you talk a little bit about these organizations and others who are actually playing a role in terms of making American Muslims more civically engaged and therefore pushing against this phenomena of Islamophobia?
Sure. And with all due respect to the many organizations that serve Muslim and Arab communities around America, I think if all of them disappeared overnight, the needle wouldn't change all that much, because this is a fight that is best done at the individual level anyway. Right. And the role of organizations should be to train individuals to be able to engage in their own communities at the local level. And that's where hearts and minds are changed. Unfortunately, in the days after 9/11, it was very much kind of a public relations type of response. Let's go in front of the camera and say Islam is peace, and maybe you'll all be quiet. And to ordinary Americans that had this look of, oh, see that building burning over there? Don't pay attention to that. Everything's okay. And the average American was like, no, everything's not okay. I'm seeing this stuff happening, and you're telling me don't worry about it. It doesn't, you have to, I may not agree with your fear, but I have to at least respect your fear in order to change your mind. And that always happens at the local level. So these organizations, for example, and the Muslim Public Service Network was founded well before 9/11. And so we've had a very interesting track record over 30 years of bringing Muslims of diverse backgrounds to DC, placing them in internships on the Hill and other places, and giving them training, not just practical training, but ethical training on how to engage in these spaces. We don't, we try to be nonpartisan. We're not here to tell you what your politics are, but we're just simply saying you have a right and responsibility to be at the table. And now, so now pretty much every Arab or Muslim that you see in government in DC, the vast majority of them are graduates of our program. And so, anywhere where we can kind of on-ramp, and Muslim Caucus, by the way, is the very same thing. If you want to get in politics, we will help you understand that system and go and put your voice in there. I think that is the best way to make change. I mean, again, I think organizations have a role to play. I would prefer that their role be empowerment and enabling of people to kind of carry their own destiny. But just from what I've seen, just from the limited view I have, this is where the needles really move.
Let me just add that there are organizations like ISPU, for example, Institute for Social Policy and Understanding. I've had, guests from this institution before on my show, and I'm definitely, and yourself as well. We are scholars with this institution. It's really trying to, change the mindset of the society in terms of producing facts and figures, like good research about American Muslims. Because as you said before, both you and Amin, and I totally agree, the core issue here is ignorance. When people are ignorant about something, we're always enemies of whatever we are ignorant about. So what you see here as the value of producing also important and meaningful research that really talks about and speaks about American Muslim realities, Shahed.
Yeah, no, I love ISPU. I was a keynote speaker at one of their fundraisers. The trouble is that you can educate people about the facts and figures all the time. And I still think that those people who see the power in Islamophobia are just going to use that to be smarter Islamophobes. And the real battle is, how do you neutralize Islamophobia as a device that helps cultivate power? That's I think to use the language of the pandemic, how do we inoculate Americans against that use? I'm telling you, when you see social media, reaching young people in their formative stages, when you see, very kind of visible and famous Muslims interacting in that arena, everyone from like the Hadids to Hassan Minhaj to, I see them as inocular, those are the vaccines.
Uh-huh.
They're getting them at that early point. They're becoming normal Americans, with all our flaws. I mean, we don't hide it. Rami Youssef has a lot of Muslims don't like Rami Youssef's show, but for a lot of young Americans, they're like, you're just like us, as flawed and as crazy as the rest of us are. And that carries through time. I went to high school in a fairly white Southern California school, the majority of whom were very kind of Republican leaning. And, even when I go to my 20 and 30-year high school reunions, I find that even though there's still, some of them are Trump voters, some of them are Tea Partiers, but they will come up to me and say, I want to let you know that in my circles, I defend Muslims because I knew you. We grew up together, and I have a real life example in front of me about how Muslims really are. And this is like 30 years of inoculation. So this is, I think, the way forward.
Absolutely. And there's actually research evidence that says that just knowing one single Muslim, if you know one single Muslim, that actually helps to change people's hearts and minds in a very positive direction.
ISPU did those studies, actually.
Absolutely.
So,
yes. ISPU did the study, the American poll, the Muslim American poll that they do every single year, and it revealed this important finding. If you know one single American Muslim, it does make a difference in terms of the way you perceive the entire American Muslim community and even Muslims at large, which is a very important point, which is why we need to nurture these interpersonal connections and relationships. We also need to nurture interfaith solidarity and interfaith work. And I'll come to you, Amin, with this question because of your forthcoming book, which talks about, the title of the book is Elders and Brothers, Jews and Muslims in the White Supremacist Imagination. Very interesting title. If you can talk to us a little bit about, number one, the role of interfaith solidarity, right? Interfaith connections. We cannot obviously do this work all by ourselves. And I agree with Shahed that yes, there are organizations doing important work, but it's not enough. We need to do more, and we cannot do this more, quote unquote, all by ourselves. We need to have allies and we need to have solidarity. So my first question to you, Amin, is the role of interfaith solidarity in terms of fighting Islamophobia. How do you see that?
Before I do, really quickly, because the last point was really interesting. You work in communication studies, and because we have less than 1% of the American population as Muslims, it seems to me that what Shahed experienced and what most of us experienced, knowing that Muslim, and what he was talking about, Rami and others, the vicarious knowing of a Muslim also does a great deal to sort of assuage people's Islamophobia. And that's why it's important for Muslims to go into and diversify their fields, as opposed to merely going and becoming doctors and engineers and so on, which is a historical problem that we've had. That said, with regard to interfaith, interfaith is important. I've done a lot of work with the Episcopal Church here locally, and trying to sort of bridge the gap. Some interfaith work is is more acceptable because, note that I said Episcopal Church. Episcopal tends to be more liberal in their orientation, etc. Some of the Jewish communities tend to be more liberal. I am in North Carolina, where it's a little bit more problematic. Southern Baptists are a little bit more closed off to the idea of interfaith work. Perhaps those are the pockets that we need to reach into and do some of that work. And so that's where we need to perhaps focus our efforts. That said, it's nothing more than what Gordon Allport called contact theory. Going in and really making prolonged and meaningful contact with the other. That's essentially what we're talking about here. And that's what interfaith work is all about. It's not to suggest that you and I are exactly the same. It's to suggest that you and I are human. And we have our own differences that make us unique, and we face our unique challenges, but nonetheless, we have to face these challenges together. As far as the book is concerned, we're looking at white supremacy, and we're looking at the white supremacist mass shooters that went into the synagogues and the mosques. And we're a little bit iconoclastic, but because we're suggesting that the white supremacists actually don't hate Muslims, nor do they hate Jews. I know this takes people by surprise. In fact, our argument is Islamophobia thrives because of public policy. We call it high fashion hatred. They know who to go after simply because that's what the signaling they're getting from up top. 9/10/2001, they didn't know who the Muslim was. 9/11, the messaging was clear. That's who you need to hate. And I used in the previous discussion that you and I were on, Sahar, talking about the Cubans. The Cubans were viewed very favorably. So that policy saw Americans looking at the Cubans as the neighbors that needed help and should be welcomed. Now, post 9/11, the public policy said this is the boogeyman that we need to fear. So, in fact, they don't necessarily, and in fact, our argument is white supremacist shooters are really doing this for themselves, because if they wanted to do this because they hated them, they would do it in secret. They wouldn't live stream it. They wouldn't write manifestos. They wanted the spotlights on themselves. Look at me. I am a hero. I'm defending the faith. I'm defending the group, etc. It's really all about them. If they could be going in and killing people from Lithuania if that was the group to hate. They don't really care, but they're simply doing it for acceptance from their group. And that group is whoever is online, the gamers and so on. So in that regard, we're iconoclastic, but at the same time, doing the work together, myself and my Jewish colleague, collaborating is seeing the commonalities between our victimization and understanding that we have to push back. And that is the utility of prejudice. Prejudice is always seen as a bad thing, but prejudice serves functions for different people. For the majority group, prejudice seeks to exclude minority members, but prejudice is also beneficial for minority members because it gets them to realize their own exclusion, says, hey, we're all alike, and we need to confront this. And in fact, if Trump really wanted to keep Muslims marginalized, he would have left them alone. But the fact that he shone the spotlight on them made them go into Congress, made them support LGBTQ, African-American, Hispanics, and Jewish groups, and they all coalesced and formed these groups and went into power.
Absolutely, which is why I always say the Trump era also had a double-edged sword effect on, American Muslims. Yes, on one hand, you had Muslim travel ban 1, Muslim travel ban 2, but also on the other hand, you had marches, right? The marches against all of these actions and, people going out from all different walks of life and all different backgrounds, showing solidarity, and showing that they're really allies of the American Muslim community. And, I always say Islamophobia is just one branch of a bigger tree, which is the tree of racism. So whenever you have racism and discrimination, you will also have Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, and, other forms of discrimination and hatred. I want to just focus on one term that you actually highlight, in relation to your new book, Elders and Brothers, which is the term conspiracism, right? What is exactly meant by this particular term, and what is the connection it has to the phenomena of mass shootings? Briefly, please.
Conspiracy. So both of them across the board, all the mass shooters they're looking at conspiracy theory, and there's two conspiracy theories that permeate all of their writings. The conspiracy that Jews and Muslims are taking over Western civilization. They're replacing them. The replacement theory is one of the predominant theories, that somehow both of these groups are marginal, both of them are minuscule vermin, Jews and Muslims, and yet somehow also superhuman, that they're able to usurp Western civilization. And so that's what we find sort of common thread amongst all of them. Whether we're talking about John Ernest or Breivik or others, it's the belief in conspiracy theory. And conspiracism really is a theology of their own. They get to live in a parallel universe where they become the stars of the show.
Absolutely. Thank you. So we're going to go now for a commercial break. Stay tuned, please.
Kashat's Mediterranean Market in Shish Kebab offers a great array of your favorite Mediterranean meals. Meals range from lamb specialties, shawarma sandwiches, and seafood dinners. Plus, they offer big trays of your favorite food and so much more. Kashat's Mediterranean Market in Shish Kebab is located at 32839 Northwestern Highway in Farmington Hills and is open from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. So stop in or call Kashat's today at 248-538-9552. That number again, 248-538-9552. Kashat's Mediterranean Market in Shish Kebab will definitely leave you satisfied.
Are you going to start a restaurant or grocery store soon? Do you need floor plans and designs? Call Naji Abood at 734-744-9796. Do you want to buy kitchen and restaurant equipment at discount prices? Call Naji Abood now, 734-744-9796. New Concept Products and Design, the trademark of kitchen equipment. 5% discount on all purchases of $75,000 or more. New Concept Products and Design, new location, 31185 Schoolcraft in Livonia. Learn more at www.newconceptproducts.com. Call Naji Abood, 734-744-9796.
While we've been staying safe at home, scientists have been on a journey. The destination, a COVID-19 vaccine. This journey began decades ago with research into other coronaviruses. Scientists built from there with months of research and development, cooperation with other experts worldwide, and clinical trials on tens of thousands of volunteers of diverse race, age, and health status. They arrived at a safe, effective vaccine, and hundreds of thousands in Michigan have already been vaccinated. But the next step is ours. We need to get the vaccine when we can. Keep wearing masks correctly and taking precautions until we reach our destination, freedom from COVID-19 and getting back to the lives we love. Discover the facts for yourself at michigan.gov/COVID vaccine. A message from the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services.
When it comes to reproductive medicine, IVF Michigan Fertility Centers are the recognized leaders. With locations in Bloomfield Hills and 5 other cities in Michigan and Ohio, IVF has experts in all aspects of the field. As a founding member of IVF Michigan Fertility Centers, Dr. Nicholas Shama is one of the leading reproductive endocrinologists in Michigan and Ohio. Dr. Shama has performed over 10,000 IVF cases and has helped thousands of couples fulfill their dreams of parenthood. American board certified in both obstetrics and gynecology and reproductive endocrinology and infertility, Dr. Nicholas Shama is a very caring, compassionate, expert physician that understands not only the medical but also the emotional toil of infertility on his patients. When it's time, get personalized care from Dr. Nicholas Shama at IVF Michigan Fertility Centers in Michigan and Ohio. Call toll-free 855-952-9600, 855-952-9600. Life is a nonprofit charity that's provided humanitarian aid and development to people and communities for over 25 years, regardless of race, color, religion, or cultural background. When disaster occurs here or around the world, Life for Relief and Development rushes in to provide food, medical aid, and shelter to those in need. Please help improve these efforts. Make your tax-deductible donation to Life now at lifeusa.org or call 248-424-7493.
This is Dr. Sahar Khamis. Welcome to my program, The Bridge, a monthly show bridging different cultures, communities, and faith traditions. Watch The Bridge on America's Voice of the Arabs Network on all social media platforms. Welcome back to the show, everyone. This is your host, Dr. Sahar Khamis. We're talking today about a very important and timely topic: the combined and compound effects of the 20th anniversary of 9/11 and the Afghanistan crisis on the surge of Islamophobia. And with me this morning discussing this important and timely topic are Mr. Shahed Amanullah and Dr. Amin Asfari. Shahed, I want to go to you with a question really about the impact that COVID-19, the philanthropy that American Muslims have done in the context of COVID-19 has been remarkable. Yet we don't see a lot of media coverage about this particular aspect. In public relations, we always say PR or public relations is doing good and telling people about it. Have the American Muslim community been doing enough to tell people about the good that they have been doing in the context of COVID-19 and the type of philanthropy they've been doing and charity they've been doing? Or are they still pretty much talking to themselves? And briefly, please, because we have just a few minutes left.
No problem, no problem. It's a double-edged sword. Right now, the person at the White House who's helping spearhead COVID-19 policy is a Muslim woman. And so, a Muslim woman in hijab, no less. And it would be great, and this is something we faced at Muslim Public Service Network. Do we tell the world about all the great things that Muslims are doing? Or would that feed into the stereotype, like, see, they are taking over, see, they are infiltrating? So we have to be very, very careful about the way we do this. That's why I prefer doing things at the personal level rather than, kind of at that official level. I don't want to put these people in harm's way.
Correct. But I also want to say that the media plays an important role in all of that, right? So when I was interviewing some people for this Muslim American philanthropy project, some of them said, we really need to reach out to the media more. And the media also needs to do its part in terms of reaching to us as American Muslims and finding out what we are doing and the type of activities we are doing. If you want to comment briefly in 1 to 2 minutes about this particular aspect, like, are we doing enough to reach out to the media? Is the media doing enough to reach out to us? How can we possibly work on this particular missing link or connection, if you will?
So one thing I do know is that Muslims who are involved in the mainstream media are actively trying to find Muslim doctors to comment on pieces on COVID-19. And again, nothing to do with being Muslim, but seeing a Muslim name or someone who's visibly, to use some of the terms earlier, visibly Muslim, helps to insert that kind of that kind of vaccine to people, where they start saying, oh, look, also, if you look, by the way, Muslim doctors are fairly well spread out in rural America, and you'll find that when you go to these places, even if there's open Islamophobia, they'll be like, oh, well, not Dr. Ahmed, he's a great guy, he delivered all our babies, he's really great. It's those other Muslims, and so that's the problem.
And I think that brings us back again full cycle also to the importance of interpersonal connections and interpersonal relationships. Your Muslim doctor, your Muslim neighbor will also make change your image about Muslims at large. Very briefly, we have 1 minute left in the program. I mean, do you want to add anything to this particular point about doing good and reaching out to others and reaching out to the media, like in half a minute?
Oh no, just want to piggyback off what Shahed said. Absolutely, it is a double-edged sword, because you also don't want to. It inoculates Islamophobia, but it also makes people hypersensitive to the fact that Muslims are omnipresent now and they're being represented more, and that's a problem for conspiracist circles. So,
absolutely, we have much more to unpack. So I'm sure I'm going to have you back again, both of you, on the show. Thank you so much for your great participation and insight today. Thank you, Amin. Thank you, Shahed. I really appreciate your perspectives and insight, and also the great work that you are doing. And thanks to all our listeners and viewers everywhere. Take care, stay safe, and goodbye.